Welcome back to the Don Dev Podcast. Today we have Jenny Gibbons and Malcolm Pierce from Woodsy Studios. How are you both doing this fine evening?
We're doing good. How about you?
Yeah, thanks for having us.
No problem. I'm not doing too bad. So I'm just going to dive right into it. I know what kind of games you make, but the listeners might not. So what kind of games do you make?
We make visual novels and narrative-focused adventure games, which is a fancy way of saying we make games that have a lot of text in them and a decent amount of reading.
That's good.
Yeah.
I like that summary.
Also known as interactive narratives, and we usually try to add some other gameplay element to mix up the storytelling. That's kind of something we experiment with each game, but the stories still our focus all the time.
Awesome. So how did you guys start doing game development? At what point in your lives? Because the more I talk to people, there's it's kind of all over the place. Some people are have had a career for like 30 years and just decide like, oh, I'll make some games, and then other people are like, I'm 16 and bored. Like, so how did you guys start?
It's a little different for both of us. I think for chronological narrative, it should be Jenny that tells us first.
Yeah, so I will say that both of us started with cinema. That's actually how we met. We went to college for screenwriting. But we decided we didn't want to stay in Hollywood the rest of our lives and entered kind of an exploration phase. And for me, that meant going to novels for a little while and taking some college classes, trying out other things. And then one thing led to another, and I made my first visual novel, kind of combining all my different skills, writing, drawing, and music. And it was just an experiment at first, like a new way I could tell a story, and it was Seraphina's Saga, and it was received really well. And so I decided to keep doing it and start taking it more seriously. And eventually, Malcolm started joining me.
Yeah, at the time when Jenny started working on visual novels, I was actually working as a lawyer, and that had been my job for a few years. And I was pretty much done with it. There are a lot of things that I liked about being a lawyer. I specifically liked being in the court. I liked making arguments. I liked writing briefs. I liked all that stuff. I didn't particularly like working for insurance companies. And while I wasn't doing the sort of work like, denying people's health insurance claims, I still ultimately, my job was to prevent insurance companies from losing more money than they have to. And that just really wasn't all that satisfying. I had always been a writer. I was always a creative person, and I felt like I was kind of stuck doing the same thing over and over again in a cause I didn't really care that much about. And so I started getting into making games probably as a hobby about a year before I stopped being a lawyer. And we just decided at some point that I couldn't do the law anymore, but I was getting really comfortable with game design and game development stuff. And so I just joined Jenny and working on games.
Awesome. So you guys do visual novels. How do you think that your medium, that specific medium, is easier and harder? Like, in what ways is it easier than a traditional, say, like platform or FPS or whatever? And in what ways would you say it's more difficult?
Well, there are two aspects to that: the marketing and the uh, actual development part.
Mhm.
Which one are you curious to know about first?
How about the marketing?
Marketing, it's definitely a challenge. The thing is, we are in a niche market, which is a mixed blessing. Like,
Right.
there's that that hardcore like visual novel fan base, um, and we're able to at least somewhat tap into that. But at the same time, we're a bit different than the majority of visual novels, so it's still hard to completely win them over, and they've got very strict standards of what they like to see. Um, so we're able to have some of the benefits of the niche, but it's still been really hard to also do our own thing, especially for a more American audience, while still trying to please the visual novel market.
Yeah, this is ultimately largely a Japanese genre, or it has been for a long time. I
Right.
think right now we are moving into an area where there's actually a lot more diversity in it and everything like that. But for a long time, the only visual novels that made it over to the United States were like X-rated visual novels.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason they made it over is that it was unique to have that concept of a game that was adult and racy and basically a porn game. And they would make it over fan translations, not actual translations in large part. So there's this in the Western consciousness, this idea that that visual novels, games like that, have that stigma, which isn't really fair, because what we're doing is not all that dissimilar from a Telltale game. It just is in a format, a format that is a little more friendly for a studio that only consists of 2 people. But we're trying to tell the same sort of stories. Unfortunately, we are sort of burdened with the history of the genre in the West, which is unfortunate because there's all sorts of non-porn visual novels in Japan, and we only see a small portion of them ever come over, such as Danganronpa and Phoenix Wright. Those probably are the most famous ones. And it would be nice if the genre was more thought of as games like that, and less like the games that are considered visual novel staples in the West, and that we sort of have to deal with the repercussions of.
Right. Do you think that will get better over time, or do you think that that's just such an overwhelming conception that you're kind of stuck there for a while?
I think it absolutely will get better over time, and I think part of the reason why is stuff that's happening specifically on mobile right now. There are actually several mobile-only visual novels that are Choices is one of them, I think.
Yeah, and Episode, I think. Those are doing very well.
And those are being very successful with a market that traditionally doesn't get into games. What's a little unfortunate for us, who kind of are married to the visual novel title, is that people don't look at them and say visual novel. They see something else, when that's exactly what they are.
Right.
But I think soon, I think people will start to realize that the genre visual novel is not entirely what they thought it was. That it can be all sorts of things. It can be any kind of story you really want it to be. It is essentially a format of graphic novel or a format of comic even that has music, it has dynamic cutscenes, things like that. And I think people will start to get used to that.
Gotcha. Okay. So back to the development side of it, how is that different from traditional, I guess, more traditional genres, would you say?
Well, there's a good side and there's a bad side. And the good side is really immediately obvious in that the amount of gameplay the word gameplay, it's really rough to call it that, but the amount of like technical gameplay that we employ in our games is somewhat minimized compared to others.
Right, like sophisticated mechanics and whatnot.
Yeah, we don't really have to worry too much about collision boxes. This is a little different in our most recent game. It actually has a RPG minigame in it, but we don't have to worry about collision boxes. The kind of bugs that we see are, I'm not going to say that all of them are easily repeatable or they're easily created again, but they tend to be because we have at least linear sections in our game. So you're never going to run into something, you're rarely going to run into something where there's a technical issue that you can't immediately reproduce. But the other side of that is that it's all about the story, which means that we have to have basically a novel length written amount of work. And then to test that, we have to run through that novel length amount of work. And it does become a burden sort of to just the volume of what we have. You sort of see what I mean, Jenny?
Yeah, and it's definitely been, an extremely different development process depending on the engine we use. For instance, we started with RenPy. It's a great just visual novel engine. That's what it's made for. And it's really wonderful at making visual novels pretty easily. But when we wanted to expand and add little bits of gameplay, that became really difficult. So we tried GameMaker and got a plugin, and then developed our own framework in GameMaker for visual novels, which was a whole lot of work. And then
I imagine
GameMaker ended up having lots of issues to the point where we just couldn't in good conscience keep using it. So we're using Unreal Engine now, and which is kind of like using a rifle to shoot a fly in some cases with a visual novel, but allows us to do a whole lot of things. And then a lot of the code challenges goes back to actually the text framework and branching narratives, which you know, a visual novel engine like RimPy does on the fly, but in Unreal we had to make our own, and that's quite a lot to deal with, like figuring out a branching narrative. It gets really complicated really fast. I think people assume that it's easy, but it
Right.
gets pretty complicated.
Just draw a flow diagram and you're good. Whatever.
And
Yeah,
then having like choices within choices and then
Right.
branches depending on your previous choices and other conditions, it gets pretty crazy.
Mhm.
yeah. I'll say to temper our. We tend to get very negative about Game Maker. I think that it is fantastic for very certain, specifically low asset games it's only going to be like 100 megabytes or something like that. I've done smaller games with Game Maker and that, and it's so simple and everything ports really quickly and everything compiles really quickly. We ran into an issue where we had about 2.2 gigabytes of sound files, and Game Maker is not designed to deal with that, at least as far as I can tell. In fact, the Game Maker 1 version was just such a hassle for sound files in general that made it basically impossible for us to port to mobile or to port to Linux or to port to Mac because of the volume of sound that we had. We were really lucky that we were able to do Xbox and PS4, and of course the PC worked, but it took 30 minutes to compile every time. So I always want to temper our...
Not build out, just compile,
Yeah.
like to test something that you change.
Wow.
Yeah, I never want to
Sounds pretty
discourage somebody
cumbersome.
yeah. Somebody who is making a 2D game that is going to be, because all going to be sprites and stuff like that, and it's not going to have that much sound. I don't want to discourage them from using Game Maker. We just ran into issues that were just made it just impassable for us, and it was really unfortunate because there were some good things about it. And but now we're on to Unreal Engine 4, and I think we have settled there. We're not going to like try and test ourselves and move to CryEngine or something next.
Gotcha.
Don't jinx it.
Yeah, no.
Gotcha. So a lot of things that I see just with interacting with other game devs online specifically is a lot of them seem to have most of their nuts and bolts programming pretty much down pat, or can easily, find something, unless they're doing something incredibly ambitious, which a lot of people are doing as well. But what a lot of people have trouble doing is finding their audience. So how did you guys find your audience, especially in, such a niche market?
Something we're still doing,
Yeah.
but I feel like
it's
we're
a grind.
getting
It's a process, right?
we're getting closer and closer. It's hard because we really like to experiment. We don't like to restrict ourselves too much with the stories we want to tell, but we really have to consider our market from the get-go. And we as we talked about with the visual novel market, I think we assumed it was more open-minded at first
Mhm.
and realized that people were very disappointed when it wasn't, R X-rated.
Really?
And just lots of different responses that we didn't expect. And it's basically been a lot of, um, trial and error. Like with Echoes of the Fae, we really wanted to reach out to a broader audience, maybe not even call it a visual novel, and I've seen a lot of other similar games out there that don't call themselves visual novels, but just call themselves adventure games. So we kind of tried that, but still struggled a lot to really tap into an audience. And where we are at right now is we're feeling the most comfortable with the Atome audience, and that's kind of a niche within the visual novel niche, that focuses more on the female audience, and the games in that genre tend to be very story heavy, with a romance element, and that's basically it. Like, it's important to have that romance, kind of a little bit of a dating sim element, but it can still be a really intricate plot. So
Gotcha.
we're kind of we're focusing more and more on that audience lately.
Yeah, that's kind of surprising to me that the visual novel audience is more or less open minded. I think, as you said, than that you one would think that there would be open to a lot of different ideas. That's very interesting. Um, So you guys are very active in the St. Louis Game Developers Co-op. I see you at pretty much every event that we're at, and I know you go to a whole lot more than us. So what is the importance of the game dev community to you? Like, what do you like to put into it, and what do you get out of it?
Um, I will say that for me, when I was just first even considering game dev as like still just a hobby and still wasn't sure how seriously I wanted to pursue it, um, getting involved with the community was a really big deal to me. And I had not found kind of a support group like that ever before. And I had, I was coming from Hollywood where it's very cutthroat. All the friendships feel very fake, and uh, everyone's using each other to climb up an invisible ladder.
Mhm.
And it felt so different here with the local community. And there were specifically some people who really encouraged me and respected me early on, like gave me confidence in what I had done so far. And that really helped push me forward and start taking it more seriously. So I've gotten more and more involved, and am at the point now where I'm hoping to encourage other people like that.
That's awesome. I know it definitely helped me to get into, because I've been in the game dev realm a lot less time than you guys have, but it just having that group really it gave me something to where I could feel comfortable like asking people things, and not just I'm diving into a shark infested waters here. And like you made a really good point, like our community, specifically outside of our local community, even online, is very collaborative. We're not necessarily competing with one another. Like we can always prop each other up, and I feel like that's a really healthy thing to have in an industry that not a lot of industries have.
Yeah,
So
you need all the encouragement you can get in this industry. So
yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned live events that you guys have gone to. What do you guys get out of those? What's the benefit to you of going to those events and showing off your stuff, and interacting with people?
Well, one thing that's really hard when you're making something, especially when you're making it with just two people like we are, is getting a good perspective of your game from somebody who doesn't intimately know everything about it.
Mm-hmm.
When we test in our own studio, we both know the ins and outs of so much of what we're doing that we just lose perspective on exactly what the player experience will be, and knowing how they'll respond to the UI, how they'll respond to the systems, things like that. It's really helpful to go to events where other people can play your game, people who wouldn't normally play visual novels, people who have never played one of your games before, people who just are walking in off the convention floor, say at a convention, and see how they respond to what you have. Because the best example I can think of this is we have story choices in our games where you would say choose yes or no to the question that's been asked of you. And we both could tell exactly which one was being selected. But as soon as we had other people play it, we could tell that they had no idea whether their cursor was hovering over yes or no. We had internalized the visuals so well that we immediately understood it, but then other people didn't. And so it was great to see, people struggle with that, because it told us that we needed to do more to indicate exactly what the selection was being made in our menus. And it added, it cut off a problem that we were going to have at the pass when we started releasing the stuff to the live audience.
Yeah, demoing is always so helpful in that regard.
Gotcha. Yeah, I kind of had the same experience when we were demoing Intrusion Protocol. We would jump through the levels and just be like, okay, what timing needs tweaked so it's not just like stopping the player dead, like just to keep them moving, like what little tweaks. And then we take it to a demo, and we realize, oh, people are having problems wall jumping up the first wall. Like,
yeah.
I think we might. Luckily, that wasn't a huge issue. Like people had trouble, but we made the mechanics simple enough to where it wasn't too hard to learn. So, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I will say that demoing visual novels is very tricky because it's such an immersive thing.
Right.
experience. And when you're at conventions and stuff, there's so much noise, everybody's so distracted. They might just want to fiddle with your game and see what it's like, but it's kind of like picking up a book and opening it up to a random page. Like that just doesn't work. So it's definitely been a challenge to try and figure out ways to provide a good demo.
Yeah, like I imagine, I kind of think of what we're doing is sort of analogous to something like a TV show or a movie or something like that, and that we're mostly trying to tell a story. And you wouldn't sit at a convention and be like, "Here, you can watch the first 15 minutes of season 2, episode 3 of Jessica Jones."
Right.
That doesn't make any sense. What is that? So we struggle to find ways to make it approachable for somebody who just is coming in with literally no experience with the game or anything like that. And I think we're getting better at that.
Awesome. I think it's all about iteration. You learn, definitely learn by doing. So what? Do you have any memories of like a negative experience while demoing or a very positive one? Like any stories while demoing?
Well, I'll tell you the one negative experience that we almost always run into at least once or twice, which is the person who sits down and just finds the skip button that we have, and is like, which is basically there for somebody who's already gone through it and wants to see other branches of the story, and is just holding it down the whole time, not reading. And I'm thinking to myself, this person thinks that there's something coming after the text. They think that they're reading to get to something gameplay,
like
but
a
they're
fight.
not. They're just gonna skip through the whole thing, and it's just this really awkward thing where I just kind of want to lean over and be like, "Hey, you don't get what's going on.
That's the game.
This is not for you."
Where's the sword? I need a sword.
Yeah.
Give me the thing to beat up the things.
Yeah, pretty much that is the negative experience that we always get.
I think we did literally have someone ask one time. It was kind of like a teenage boy, and it was just like, "When do I get to fight?" Like, there's not any fighting. It's reading.
So on the opposite end, have you had anybody just like really get into it at a demo?
Oh yeah. Of course, it's hard to tell, except that they stay there for a long time. I think we've had people play an hour and a half is maybe.
Yeah. I think we
longest.
had that is maybe the longest. Like especially when we did our demos of a completed game where we were just like, oh, we're just gonna set this out to, at our second computer to have them play the older game, and they would just sit there for a long time. I'm like, well, they're into it.
Yeah.
That's how you know they're into it.
That's like I've had somebody do that too, and we at some point we're like, man, we kind of want to kick this guy off so other people can play, but at the same time, like he's really showing it off. Like he's like, man, people love watching this guy. Let's just keep him going. We had somebody like our first game was designed kind of by accident, but then we kind of rolled with it to be difficult, like short but difficult. And some guy like at Pixel Pop last year, he beat the game at the thing. He was determined. He's like, I'm gonna beat this game, and he did. There were two people like racing to the end at the first day, and then time ran out and they couldn't finish the game, but they were both so close. And we were like, oh, no, sorry. And then the guy came back the next morning and was like, I'm beating this game. I'm like, go for it. And he did. And then since then, he's recorded ridiculous times. Like, he's like,
nice.
Like, yep, beat your game in 15 minutes. I'm like, damn. I can't beat it still. I haven't beaten the last level. So, oh my gosh. Well, thank you guys for being on the podcast. Always a good conversation. Yeah. Check out Woodsy Studios. Check out Miracler. Is that I'm pronouncing that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's Miracler. It is Miraclr. It's a strange name. Yes.
Divine dating sim.
Yes.
That'll also get you there.
If that doesn't pique your interest, I don't know what will. Like Divine dating sim, come on. And also check out Echoes of the Fae. So again, thanks for being on the show, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.